It was a normal Tuesday evening when Andrew felt something was wrong. His wife, Lila, had always been the center of his world, beautiful, full of energy, and so easy to love. For 7 years, they had been each other's rock. But lately, things felt different. There was a distance between them, like a wall he couldn't see but could feel. It wasn't something obvious, but it was there, growing little by little. Lila still looked the same. Her smile was just as lovely, her laugh just as sweet, but something was missing. Sometimes, he'd catch her staring at her phone or looking far away, lost in her thoughts. Andrew couldn't quite figure out what it was, but it left him feeling uneasy. Then there were the late nights. Lila had started working late more often, saying she had meetings or last-minute projects. She always had a reason, and when she came home, she'd smile and apologize for being late. But her apologies felt empty, like they were just words she had to say. Even their conversations were different now. They used to laugh and share stories about their day, but now it felt like they were just talking about schedules and small things, never really connecting like they used to. Andrew told himself it was nothing. She was busy. They were both busy. He had his stressful job, and she had her growing career in interior design. It was normal for life to get in the way sometimes, wasn't it? Not every day could feel exciting after so many years. Still, no matter how many excuses he made, something didn't feel right. But Andrew wasn't ready to face what that might mean. Not yet. But then one evening, the truth found him. One evening, while reviewing some financial documents for their upcoming tax filing, Andrew noticed something odd. It was a receipt in their joint account for a high-end boutique hotel downtown. The name of the hotel was familiar. They had spent their anniversary there 2 years ago. But the date of the receipt didn't match any special occasion. In fact, it was from a random Thursday afternoon just a few weeks prior, a day Andrew distinctly remembered working late at the office. He frowned. Maybe it was a mistake. Perhaps Lila had treated a client there, or maybe the charge belonged to someone else and had been added to their account by error. He shrugged it off but decided to keep the receipt aside, planning to ask her about it casually. That night, as they sat across the dinner table, Andrew brought it up. "Hey, Lila, I noticed something weird in the bank statement. Did you stay at the Grand Willow a few weeks ago?" Lila froze mid-bite. Her reaction was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was enough for Andrew to notice. "Oh," she said after a moment, her voice too casual. "Yeah, I was there for a client meeting. It was just easier to meet there than at the office." "Why?" "No reason," Andrew replied, carefully studying her face. "It just stood out. That's all." Lila smiled, her usual charming smile that could disarm anyone, but something about it felt forced. "You're always so thorough, Andrew. Don't worry. It's nothing." Andrew nodded and let the subject drop, but a seed of doubt had already been planted. That night, as Lila showered, Andrew went back to the bank statements. The hotel charge wasn't the only unusual transaction. A couple of expensive restaurant bills, a spa package, and a jewelry store purchase, all charges that didn't seem to fit into their usual spending patterns, stood out like neon signs. He knew he hadn't made any of those purchases, and Lila hadn't mentioned them either. The next morning, after Lila left for work, Andrew called the Grand Willow Hotel. His hands trembled slightly as he held the phone, trying to keep his voice calm. "Hi, I'm calling to confirm a reservation," he said, giving them the date and Lila's name. The receptionist's voice was polite but hesitant. "Yes, Mrs. Lawson stayed with us that evening. Would you like me to resend the invoice?" Andrew swallowed hard. "Was it a single occupancy?" "No, sir. The reservation was for 2 guests." The ground seemed to shift beneath him. Andrew thanked the receptionist and hung up, his mind racing. The evidence was there, plain as day. Lila had been with someone else. He could almost see it, her laughing over champagne, her hand brushing someone else's across the table. His stomach churned with a mix of anger and nausea. That evening, Andrew didn't say anything. He watched Lila as she moved around the house, acting as though everything was normal. She kissed him on the cheek when she walked past, oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. For a moment, he wondered if he should confront her. But the truth was, he didn't want her excuses. He didn't want her lies. Instead, Andrew began digging deeper. Over the next few days, he quietly tracked her credit card activity. He found more restaurant bills, tickets for events he hadn't attended, and yet another hotel booking. This one for a weekend he had spent at a company retreat. Each piece of evidence was a knife in his chest, cutting deeper into the image of the life they had built together. When Andrew finally discovered Julian's name on a florist receipt for a bouquet labeled, "For Lila, my muse," it was the final blow. He looked up Julian online and found his picture, an artsy, self-assured man who looked like he belonged in a gallery opening. A man who clearly thought he was better than the husband he was undermining. One evening, Andrew confronted her, not with accusations, but with cold, hard evidence. He waited until after dinner, when Lala was relaxed, sipping wine on the couch. Without a word, he placed the receipts and printouts of her transactions on the coffee table in front of her. The hotel reservations, the dinners, the flowers, everything. Lala's face went pale. "Andrew," she began, but he cut her off. "Don't. Just don't," he said, his voice low but steady. "I already know. I've seen everything. I know about Julian." She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words, but no words came. Finally, she admitted it. "Yes," she whispered. "It's true." Her admission didn't bring relief, just a hollow ache. Andrew stared at her for a long time, his face unreadable. "Why?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I felt lost. We've been drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. Julian, he was just a distraction. It didn't mean anything." Andrew's laugh was bitter. "Didn't mean anything? You've spent months lying to me. To us. And for what? A distraction." Lala tried to reach for him, but he stepped back, his expression cold. "I'll tell you this much, Lila. You won't have to worry about fixing this." "What does that mean?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "You'll see," Andrew said, and with that, he turned and left the room. The next day, Andrew exposed everything. He sent anonymous emails to Lila's colleagues and friends detailing her affair. He posted cryptic social media updates that left no doubt about what she had done. Lila's carefully curated world began to crumble around her. Clients cancelled contracts, friends stopped answering her calls, and even her family looked at her with judgment in their eyes. But Andrew wasn't there to see the fallout. By the time Lila realized what he had done, he was already gone. His phone was disconnected, his social media accounts were deleted. His colleagues told her he had taken an indefinite leave of absence. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving her to pick up the pieces of the mess she had created. Lala's hand shook as she scrolled through the comments. The shame burned through her like acid. But there was no word from Andrew. No follow-up. No confrontation. He was gone, just like that. Completely. It felt as though he had disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only silence and the mess of her actions. Days turned into weeks, and Lila's world kept falling apart. She tried everything to reach him. She called his phone over and over, leaving voicemail after voicemail, each one more desperate than the last. "Andrew, please, just talk to me," she begged in one. In another, her voice shook with frustration and guilt. "Why are you doing this to me? Why won't you answer?" But no matter how many times she tried, there was nothing. No response. His phone always went straight to voicemail. She checked his social media accounts, only to find they were gone, completely deleted. She emailed him, but her messages bounced back with an automatic reply. "This account is no longer active." Andrew wasn't just ignoring her. It felt like he had erased himself from her life entirely. At first, Lila refused to believe it. She told herself that he just needed time, that he'd come back eventually. But as the silence stretched on, her hope turned into panic. She started searching for him everywhere. She hired a private investigator, hoping they could track him down, but they came back with nothing. No address, no phone number, no trace of where he might have gone. She reached out to mutual friends, asking if anyone had heard from him, but they all said the same thing. We haven't heard from Andrew either. Each conversation felt like another door slamming shut, leaving her with fewer and fewer answers. In a moment of desperation, she went to his workplace, standing nervously in the lobby as she asked if he was in. The receptionist gave her a sympathetic look and said, "I'm sorry, but Andrew doesn't work here anymore. He resigned a few weeks ago." Lila's heart sank. He had even left his job, something she thought he would never walk away from. It became clear to her, Andrew didn't just want space. He wanted to disappear completely. He had cut himself out of her life so cleanly it felt as if he had never been there. Lila was left with nothing but questions, regret, and the haunting silence of a man who didn't want to be found. It wasn't until months later that Lila finally found Andrew, or rather, found out where he had been. She had tracked him to a quiet cafe in Paris, of all places. He was sitting alone at a table, a cup of coffee in front of him, his expression as unreadable as it had been the day she first discovered the affair. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she approached him, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to expect. He looked up when she sat down across from him, his eyes cool and distant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Lila broke the silence. "Andrew, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I hurt you. I didn't mean for it to be like this. I love you. Please, let's fix this." Andrew didn't flinch. He didn't look angry, didn't look sad. He simply stared at her, his gaze sharp but hollow. "You think it's about the affair, don't you?" he said quietly. "You think it's about Julian, or the public exposure, or the humiliation. But it's not. It's about me, Lila. It's about me realizing that I never really knew how to love you. I didn't know how to love anyone. My silence, my ghosting, wasn't about punishing you. It was about me protecting myself. I couldn't face it. I couldn't face us." Lila sat back, stunned by the depth of his words. "But why?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why leave without saying anything? Why not just talk to me?" Andrew shook his head. "Because I couldn't talk to you. I couldn't even talk to myself. Ghosting you was the only way I knew how to deal with the pain. It was the only way I could make sense of it all." They sat in silence for a long while, neither of them knowing what to say next. The weight of everything hung between them, unspoken but clear. Andrew had no answers for her, and Lila had no more excuses to give. The silence between them now wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of an ending. The end of their marriage, the end of their dreams together, and perhaps the end of who they were before everything fell apart. Lila finally spoke, her voice a whisper. "Can we fix this, Andrew? Can we ever go back?" Andrew looked at her, his face unreadable. "I don't know, Lila. I don't know if I can trust again. I don't know if I can ever be the man you wanted me to be. But I've learned something through all of this." "What's that?" "That sometimes we don't get to have the answers. And sometimes the silence is all we have left."